Good afternoon. It's Mary Howden here from the Women's Rights Network in Scotland, and we're really privileged today to have with us novelist Drew Augustine, who has just published her first novel, which is 20 Murders, and I believe is the first gender-critical fiction book. There's a lot of fact books out there about women, and obviously the one that's going to be about women who wouldn't wish is going to be published this week. So the timing of this, I think, for Drew's book is actually really, really excellent. So welcome, Drew. It's good to meet with you. We also have with us some members of the Women's Rights Network Scotland. We've got Donna. Do you want to say hello, Donna?
Hello.
We've got Jo.
Hi.
Helen.
Hello.
And Deirdre.
Hello.
And what I'd like you to do is to think of us as if we're just a little book group that has read Drew's book, and we're now going to have this really fantastic opportunity to discuss it with them. So let's get started, shall we? So Drew, can I ask you what inspired you to write 20 Murders?
Thank you. So I first became aware of the issue 2 or 3 years ago, and one of the things that piqued my interest was the vitriol that J.K. Rowling was obviously getting when she tweeted in support, first of all, of Maya Forstater, and then she made a perfectly sensible tweet in relation to people are erasing the word woman from the language. I believe her tweet said something along the lines of, she was commenting on the term people who menstruate. And yeah, so this piqued my interest. And so I started to look into this. And the more I lifted the lid on this thing, the deeper and darker it got. And I would say it probably culminated then with the Scottish Government's debating and enacting the Gender Recognition Reform Bill in the Scottish Parliament. And I would say that was, to use the term, piqued me, particularly when they refused the amendment to, not allow sex offenders to self-identify as well. And then the alarm bells really began to ring. So it was those incidents.
I mean, that's a thing I think that probably has piqued most of us. Just that unwillingness to actually put in those safeguards for women, and children into that bill. It was shocking, really. And I suppose that's been one of the main reasons why it was not taken any further in terms of, the Section 35 order and that being, put in place. So you've got this idea that you want to write a novel, about it all. So what do you do next? What sort of research did you have to do to put into it?
I did a lot of research. I have completely stuffed up my Amazon also boughts list because I was buying Helen Joyce's Trans, Kathleen Stock, Material Girls, Hannah Barnes' book, Time to Think, Graham Linehan, Tough Crowds. So everything and anything that I could get my hands on, I steeped myself in it. I even read 1984 again by George Orwell because I thought it was just so spot on. I hadn't read that since I was in high school, and that was a long time ago. I listened to lots of podcasts. I read Jo Phoenix's witness statement from her employment tribunal as well. I looked into what happened to Kathleen Stock. I listened to Kelly J. Keane, Turf Talk Tuesday. I obviously looked at the Women's Rights Network site. I listened every time I was cooking, ironing, doing any housework. I was listening to podcasts. Jordan Peterson, James Esses, Barry was the Court of the EDI Jester. Everything and anything. And I just immersed myself in this. And I wrote with it. I knew I wanted to write a book with a strong purpose, and the purpose was to surface the issues that this ideology has, not just on women, children and families, but also the institutions and organisations as well. Because one of the most worrying things in all of this, all of it's worrying, but it's the attack on free speech and this no debate stance. Freedom of speech and assembly are the things that underpin our very democracy. And so that was very concerning as well. And so once I had done the research, I thought, right, the story was starting to formulate in my head. It was all in my head before I ever put pen to paper or, fingers on keyboard. And I think it was when I read Hannah Barnes' book, Time to Think, which is about the debacle at the Tavistock Gender Clinic, the GIDS service, that it started to formulate in my mind that what I wanted to do was show it very much from the point of view of what was being done to children in the name of this ideology, and very much the indoctrination from school right through to jumping on that train, because once these children are on this train, whether it's initially social transition, it is a one-way ticket quite often to drugs, experimental drugs, and ultimately mutilation and surgery. And I think, again, it's horrific. And I really did wonder how low does this stuff go? And it goes pretty low. So yes, it's a long-winded answer to your question. But
No, but I think that all of us can relate to that in terms of that immersion and all of that. Obviously not with the insight of a book to write. So without giving us away any of the endings, because we really don't want to do that in this, and we apologise profusely to anyone if we do. What's the book about?
So the book is a crime thriller. It follows the hunt for a serial killer. It starts quite hard hitting, I would say. We'll talk about that. Probably we'll come on to that. But a body turns up, and it follows a police officer, and the character is actually based on a friend of mine who a beat officer, and
that was one of my questions.
Oh, was it? Oh,
yes.
Sorry. Shall I go on, or do you want to ask me a question later?
Well, my question was, are any of the characters based on anyone you know in real life?
Oh yeah, quite a few, but I'll deny that, and I'll stand behind my.
Of course.
I think my legal thing, the characters and events are all fictitious. But she's loosely based on a friend of mine who was a serving police officer in Scotland and was seconded to CID, and later she served special branch. And so I took her out for many lunches and had many discussions about this, in order for me to create Morven's world. And so it very much follows Morven, who's teamed up with a detective called Dave, who they've got a bit of history. I'll not say what it is. So it's a bit troubled history. They don't really get on. And anyway, the bodies start to turn up. And there doesn't appear to be any connection between the murders. And then Morven starts to realise that, actually, I think there is a connection. And what she discovers and what she thinks is going on is just such a politically toxic issue. It's obviously, we're discussing this. It's all to do with the trans issue. But it's, the police are captured as well. And, they try to shut down the investigation. They don't want this going here. So it's mainly that, but also woven through the story of the hunt for the serial killer is the story of another woman who's called Kerry, and she's an academic, and she hits the issues with trans ideology in her role as an academic. And she supports research students, and she has students who come to her and say, well, we want to study, maybe like stuff to do with trans ideology. It's very much based on what happened to Jo Phoenix. And Jo Phoenix, she was a criminologist and she worked at the Open University, and she was particularly interested in this putting men who identify as women into female prisons and what the effects on the women in the prisons are. And when she wanted to study this, she was called a bigot, a transphobe. You know, this research, she was told, had to close down. And this turns up in several areas of academia, anything to do with, you know, the criminology and sociology side of things, if people want to study it. The other part that it's affecting is, and the Cash Review touched on this, it's to do with people who detransition. So these are people who started to identify as a member of the opposite sex and then changed their mind. And academics who want to study this phenomenon, which is very important, I think, particularly in light of the Cash Review, it's been shut down, told no, it's too toxic, don't go there, you cannot study this. Now, this is academia. And of all the areas in society, these questions, nothing should be out of bounds. And it was Jo Phoenix's own words, you know, when did we stop, you know, telling people how to think and tell them what to think? So, yes. Again, another long-winded answer to your question.
But you do weave that, you know, the situation that Jo Phoenix found herself in terms of the character, Kerry, you do actually weave that in really well, and you get a real sense of that struggle between, you know, the pressure of academia wanting you to say one thing and actually scientifically and knowledge-wise knowing that you need to say something else.
Thank you. Yes. And one of my early readers said, oh, it's so frustrating reading what's happening to Kerry. So you can just imagine what people like Jo Phoenix and Kathleen Stock actually went through. I mean, Kathleen Stock was hounded out of our university campus by, you know, youths and wearing balaclavas. So it must have been truly terrifying. And she was told it was too unsafe to actually be on campus. That must have been horrendous for her.
It must have been very scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to capture that in Kerry's story, that fear that she had for her own safety as soon as she spoke out.
I had another question, and it was about the murders and, you know, and did you come across anything that was really, really, so bad you thought, I can't use that?
Oh, that is a good question. I did not want without giving too much away, I didn't want my murders to target trans-identified people. I didn't want to. The book is not. It'll be accused of being transphobic, and I would argue it's not. What I'm doing in the book is questioning trans ideology theory that underpins all of this. It's not an attack on the people who are caught up in this situation, the people who believe that they are born in the wrong body, particularly you know, youngsters caught up in this situation. So I did deliberately steer away from that, and it was when I read the Hannah Barnes book about, you know, what was going on at the time, I kind of, it formulated in my mind where I wanted to go with this. So yes.
I mean, you did have a character, Eddie, who is, you know, quite a very likeable character, and of course this character is trans and a likeable man now, and he has principles, you know, relating to the children and the way they're being exploited. So I mean, you're definitely not being transphobic there, I know, because you know you've got this sympathetic normal character who lives a normal life with a normal family and children, but he still has the same views as, what we would have.
Yes, and one of the things that I discovered, which really quite shocked me, was that a lot of these people, like Eddie, who have gone down this route, who maybe started to go down the drugs and surgery route gradually and slowly, and committed to all these horrendous changes that they must have gone through, they're vilified by a lot of the transactivists, sorry, and they're labelled true scum. And I wanted to highlight that in the book, because an awful lot of the activists nowadays, and Stonewall will have you think that you don't need to present as a woman, if you're a man who thinks you're a woman, and vice versa. Yeah, you don't need to dress and identify as that. You don't need to have hormones. You don't need to have surgery. It's enough to just have that inner feeling of being a female, whatever that means. And you can have unfettered access to women's spaces, to refugees, to rape crisis centres. And the people who've gone to all that bother, like Eddie, they're dismissed as true scum. And I think that's also a very worrying aspect as well, because people like Eddie do exist. So I hope that answered your question.
I have one about the kind of forensic detail that you have in the book in terms of postmortems and stuff like that. Is that a whole new area of learning for you?
It was actually. I read a couple of books. Now there's a famous pathologist, he was top UK pathologist, called Dr. Richard Shepherd, and I give him full credit. He wrote a couple of books. One was, I think it's on natural causes. So if you like something like Silent Witness on television, the books are very much like that. And I tell you, he does not spare any details. He talks about a lot of the unusual and unnatural deaths he had to conduct postmortems on, and he goes into some detail, and it was morbidly fascinating. But I thought, again, for a crime thriller, this would really bring the kind of visceral nature of the murders to light. So it was something else. I had never read anything like that before myself, although I'm a Silent Witness fan. So yeah.
So, at one point, I thought you had a story. One of the deaths, the lady had a dog, and I thought at some point the dog might sniff out the culprit for us, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen. The dog didn't sniff out the culprit.
Do you know, I have yet to write a book. I've written several books in different genres, and have yet to write a book that does not have a dog in it. I have a couple of dogs, and they're my muses and my inspiration. And I do a lot of my writing out on dog walks, and any issues that I have with a book, I ask the dog, and I always have a dog in my book.
Well, there you go. That's fascinating.
I always slightly worry when dogs appear in these things, because my first thought is, please don't kill the dog. Don't let the dog.
No, I couldn't bear for anything to happen to the dog, and I won't give away what does happen to the dog. But I became quite fond of the dog. I felt quite sorry for the dog.
Yeah, could I just ask about I'm trying not to give any detail away. The first sort of big thing that happened, I jumped into bed one night and I thought, I'm going to start this book now. Had it on my Kindle, and it's really, really early on, isn't it, that this first incident takes place. And I think it's probably because personally, that's one of my biggest fears around this whole trans ideology stuff that's infiltrated institutions. And it just played right into that fear. And I just sort of wondered, did you think twice about putting that at the beginning? Or was that a very conscious thing, because it was quite shocking, right off the bat?
Thank you. It's an excellent question, and I apologise if I gave you nightmares when you started the book before going to bed.
Shoved it under my pillow.
The short answer to the story is no, I didn't have any qualms, and I do apologise for that, because one, you're right, it's one of the most shocking aspects of this entire capture of the NHS, let's just say that, by trans ideology, and the effect that it has on female-only spaces, and it affects very vulnerable women. And the most shocking cases, whether it's women in prison or women in hospital, it's always very vulnerable women that this affects. And I think we've got to keep that in mind. The other aspect, the other part to my answer is, when you're writing something like crime fiction as an author, you have to hook the reader right away, I think. And so partly it was a method of hooking you right away. It's a bit of a pun, isn't it? The prologue. And it's also sets up a question in the reader's mind, just what has gone on here. And that doesn't get resolved until, much later. And then in the final scenes, it's wrapped up. But, I do apologise. Writers, as you're probably realising, are not very nice people. We will hook you in. We will take you down a path you don't want to go. We'll not tell you what you want to know. And we will tease you like a cat with a mouse. So, yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of the things you write about, are actually based on, true events. A lot of the things that you weave into the book have actually happened.
They are all of it is based on true events. Obviously the murders didn't happen and the characters and the place are fictitious, but just about all of it is, the backdrop is all based on real events. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, actually. And I think that's the shocking aspect of it. And I hope, one of my hopes is, in writing this book, that, because all the books at the moment are factual, and okay, you can listen to podcasts, but not everybody does. But I thought it's a way to surface the issues for, just ordinary people, and what better way than something popular like a crime fiction book that, a lot of people might read on holiday, or, for a book club or whatever. One thing to answer Josephine as well, one thing that I did consider, and I hummed and hawed over it for a while, was whether I should put a trigger warning on the book, because in a different genre, I remember putting out a book and I got hammered for it because it had quite a punchy scene as well. And my book marketing person said, "Oh, we forgot to put the trigger warning on." And, so I put the trigger warning on. I don't know whether it makes much difference whether people even read them, but I had a little bit of fun with the trigger warning. So I did include it in the end, but I also add, it also contains truths, unspeakable truths. And
yes, but you don't actually say very much, about what actually happened in that prelude. So it's all left to your own.
And do you know, that's worse, I think, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's worse.
yeah.
It's what,
that's
it's
probably
what your imagination conjures up. It's always worse.
But you raised a really interesting point there about trigger warnings, and we read all these things about sensitivity readers and looking at things, and I suppose you're saying earlier that you'd read George Orwell, and I know your book's self-published, so I suppose you might not have been impacted in the same way by any of those constraints that a publishing company might put you through in terms of some of those things.
That's a good point. I knew as soon as I ventured into this space there was no way that any literary agent would touch me. Now, I've been an author for several years, and, you know, usually when you write a book, you approach agents, and, but before I even went near this book, I've had questions from agents who basically saying to me, we'd be interested in hearing from you and your work if you are a member of a certain part of the community, one of which would be maybe the BAME community, LGBTQ+. If you're neurodiverse, we want to hear from you. But the best one was, I was asked once, well, if you'd committed a crime and you were being rehabilitated, we would be interested in reading your work. And I just thought, well, what has that got to do with what I write about? And, you know, why should... But we very much as a society, because of, you know, DEI or EDI, whatever you want to call it, equity, diversity, equality, we've very much gone down this route. And it doesn't sit comfortably with me, because I think what's happening now is we're actually inadvertently discriminating against whole groups of people. I mean, I think it's very difficult for white middle-class males to get published now unless they're already established writers, and that's pretty much confirmed. There was some recent research done amongst publishing houses. So I knew right away I couldn't go down the traditional publishing route. I have self-published before, so I knew what it involved. It's one thing writing a book, it's also quite a task to self-publish it as well. So yeah, but you're right, I didn't have those constraints. It was very much down to me. But the difficulty with that is, normally I would approach an independent editor and say, well, you know, will you edit my book and point out any, you know, howlers before it goes? And I couldn't do that because I didn't know who I could trust to read the book. So I've relied on an incredible band of my beta readers, my early readers, and they were wonderful, mainly friends and family. Most of them had to listen to me banging on about this issue, so they knew what it was. I had one chap who didn't know anything about the book, and he was very good, and he read it, and I was talking to him the other day actually, and it filled my heart with glee, because apparently he turned round to his children afterwards and said, how many genders are there? And he's checking with his children and what they're getting taught at school. So I thought, well, I've picked someone. So, yeah, which was wonderful.
I mean, it might be a good thing if people pick it up and think, oh, I like murder mysteries and crime thrillers, you know, on holiday. And if they don't know anything about this situation, you know, it might enlighten them somewhat.
That's the hope. That's the hope.
Yes. So, yes, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
And when I wrote the blurb for the back cover, one of my beta readers, she's a good friend, and you would call her a TERF. And she says, oh no, you can't write that. That's a dog whistle, she says. So I had to go and recraft my blurb. But it was things like that. And normally you would get, you know, help from a traditional publishing house to do all these things. But no, it's all down to me. So at least if there's any mistakes or whatever, it's only me I have to blame. So.
I think though that you've actually quite cleverly woven in a whole range of different themes that many people looking at them would see them as being quite separate. So, for instance, you know, you've got the stuff going on in schools, you've got, you know, drag queens turning up at libraries, and, you know, there's a real kind of skill to that, weaving all of these things together and bringing it around a story. I think it must have been one of the challenges for you. Must have been, how do you decide what to keep and what to discard in terms of, you know, the experiences that your characters had?
Thank you for that. Yeah, there's a fine balance, I think, between, you know, giving enough information and you know, wanting to enlighten people and just downright preaching at them, which nobody wants. You know, you don't want that when you're reading a fiction book. one area I decided that I probably couldn't and wouldn't touch, because I think it's doing a jolly good job of its own, is sport. It's when, you have trans-identified males competing in women's sports. And I think it's very obvious to people, why that is just so wrong, and why biology matters. So I didn't touch on that. I don't think I touched on that at all in the book. But yes, I did try to touch on its many aspects and how it affects women and children, and also the institutions that have been captured, including academia and the police, and also the NHS. I mean, one of the characters is a midwife, and I was quite shocked as well when I was writing about that stuff, just how captured midwifery is. I mean, we had the NHS spent a fortune on this computer system, which I think I mentioned in the book. And what it was doing, it had been coded so that they could not capture a baby's sex. So this is a newborn baby, and they couldn't say male or female. They could only capture the baby's gender identity. Now, if there's one area where it's absolutely vital that you capture sex, it's, in a newborn baby, because those health records follow you around for the rest of your days. Well, most of the time they do. So, yeah. So that was one area that shocked me. And also just the erasure of women from a lot of the literature, the health literature. I think it's something that's become a problem, particularly for people who maybe don't speak English as a first language. It's very difficult for them to tease out what is meant by words like, birthing parent, or, a vulva owner, or a menstruator. I mean, apart from anything that's very demeaning language, to reduce women to their biological function. And the irony is, by the very people who would deny that biology is real. So, yeah, go figure.
Vulva owner almost makes me think of a car.
I know.
If I could go back to the sports issue, which is something that I feel very passionately about, just as a park runner, but also as a jog leader and somebody that helps out with our club's juniors. What I have found, both dealing with the young Lib Dem chap and I think Christine Jarden as well the other day, they just all say, well, we're not really interested in sport, because how can they possibly argue for this nonsense in sport? So I think they just shrug it off and say, oh, it's up to the different sports bodies, some of which are now being sensible. Or they'll bring up Caster Semenya, who is, of course, a very different sort of category altogether. A biological male with female genitalia, that's pretty much that. So I think it's something that they are just sweeping away and hope that they won't be asked about it, because it's indefensible.
It is indefensible. Yeah, it is indefensible. And I think part of the problem is that girls will self-exclude. In fact, the chap who was beta reading my book, his children, his young daughter plays football. And, girls of that age, they'll get to an age where they don't want to participate in the same team as or against males, because I mean, it gets to the point it's dangerous, and there have been serious sporting injuries. I mean, rugby, they were the sensible ones in the end, and I believe it was a colleague of Joe Phoenix, a philosopher, who went in to talk to the rugby body and basically said, listen, you need to have a kind of order of priority here, and when you're deciding, what's important, you've got to put safety first. So you've got to put the safety of your players first, so safety of women first, above and beyond, the feelings of trans-identified males. And I think that's just very, very sensible advice. And I don't know why, like the FA are not going down the same route. I mean, football's a contact sport. And these girls, I mean, do girls have to be seriously injured or worse for this to change? They're going to lose all the grassroots players as well.
Well, and unfortunately, although there are some elite sports where they've, made the female category just for females. In fact, most grassroots sports, and within, schools, clubs, whatever, they actually allow, boys who say that they're girls to actually compete as girls. And I think that must be so demoralising for young girls. Not only do you have to put up with, the impact of going through puberty and what that's like in terms of, and you actually do that really quite well in the book as well.
Thank you.
Which, that whole bit about being embarrassed and all the rest of it. So to have to put up with that and then on top of that, just not be able to beat these boys because they're faster must be just so demoralising. And ultimately what you'll see from that, I think, is that there will be very few sports where there are elite women, because where do these elite women come from? They come from, grassroots sports where they've been encouraged to do their best.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe though, Drew, that is a follow-up, a sequel.
Yes, it
the
could
sports
be.
area.
The sports area. The other... Oh no, go ahead.
Or a wee sci-fi. I love
sci-fi.
A wee sci-fi, so 20 years from now, it's not the zombie apocalypse, it's the trans apocalypse.
Oh yes, there's certainly.
Been mutilated and have been taking poisonous hormones that are totally wrong for their bodies for 20 years. And they're just going crazy. So
I think that is going to be such a tragedy that I don't know that anybody would have the stomach to read it, to be quite honest.
Well, I think that's right.
One area that has piqued my interest, and depending what I have to decide what I do next, but I'm fascinated by the whole surrogacy and egg harvesting business that's going on as well, and I think that might be something that I turn my attention to in future. I haven't even started the research. I think I need to go away and write a rom-com or something like that now, because I'm quite, just for my own emotional well-being.
I was going to ask you, sorry.
No, it's all right.
You have a story, John, if you've got any plans to use the same set of characters, but in even a completely different scenario, or...
I might well do, and I've been asked that one of my early readers, and I grew quite fond of Morven and Dave as well, and so they might crop up in a future book.
The sequel.
Never say never. The sequel.
Yeah, I think we'll all look forward to any future, even if it's a rom-com. I'm sure we can manage with a rom-com,
Well, there's quite a bit of romance in that book as well, in the 20 Murders.
I'm a hopeless romantic, I'm afraid. There's always a bit of romance, and there's always a dog in my book, so can't help myself.
Well, I suppose that's what makes a good book,
It does.
A bit of murder, a bit of romance, a bit of questioning, will they, won't they, and who did it?
What more?
And will they do it?
So, we're just about coming up towards the end of our time. Is there any last comments or questions, Burnley, that anyone has I think we've managed to successfully not give away the end, haven't we?
Yeah, we've done very well. We've done very well.
We have done very well, I think. Well, is there any last thing you would like to say, Drew?
This has been wonderful, to just chat to you all about my book. It took about maybe a good year of my time between all the research and the drafting, and then the rewriting, and then the comments from my early readers. So no, it's been wonderful. It's been really good, and we'll just look to the future now. Look forward, and I'll I'll go away, I think, and write my rom-com or something for my, the sake of my mental health after this. And then I'll maybe revisit Strathmurray again with Dave and Morven. I'll have a good think about that. So, yeah, but I think I need to give my family a break, actually. I think they're fed up listening to me, so.
Well, it's been an absolute privilege for us to have such access to yourself to kind of talk through some of these things, in relation to your book. And we do wish you every success with it. And I think that it can be one of these books where you've got friends who, disagree with you completely on it, that you could maybe just put it down for them at their table to read or whatever. So I think
they'll all be getting a present of it.
well, I might as well. You never know.
Well, thank you so much. The pleasure's been all mine, and I do thank you very much. I'm very grateful for all of your support.
Yeah. And we look forward to, whatever you do next, and we look forward to seeing your book being a success. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, head over to womensrights.network/WRN-podcast to listen, download and subscribe to more great episodes. And if you'd like to join us, go to womensrights.network/join-WRN.